I was sitting at the kitchen table, poking at a bowl of cereal that had long since gone soggy. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the floor. It was a typical Saturday morning, or so I thought. My parents, Lila and Jackson, were sitting across from me, exchanging glances that made my stomach churn. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. "Harper," my mom started, her voice too cheerful, like she was trying to sell me a used car. "Your father and I have something to tell you." I looked up, spoon halfway to my mouth, and saw my dad nodding along, his expression a mix of guilt and relief. I knew then that whatever they were about to say was going to change everything. "We're getting a divorce," my dad said, cutting straight to the point. "But it's for the best, really. My name is Harper, and at 14, I thought I had a pretty good grasp on my life. School was school, friends were friends, and my family, well, they were supposed to be the one constant. But now, sitting there with my parents dropping this bombshell, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. Instead, they started talking over each other, words like new beginnings and better for everyone floating around the room like confetti. I felt like I was watching a movie, detached and surreal, except this was my life unraveling. "There's more," my mom added, her eyes darting to my dad like they were sharing some inside joke. "We've both met someone new." "Someone new," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Already?" My dad cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Yes, Valerie and I are expecting a baby. And Greg and I are moving in together," my mom chimed in, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I felt like I was in the middle of a bad dream, one where everyone was speaking a language I didn't understand. My parents were moving on, building new families, and I was just expected to tag along, no questions asked. The room was spinning, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "So, what about me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll figure it out," my mom said, waving a hand dismissively. "You'll have 2 homes now, more people to love." I wanted to scream, to flip the table and storm out, but instead, I sat there, nodding like a puppet. Inside, though, a storm was brewing, betrayal mixed with a simmering anger that I couldn't quite place. It felt like my parents had just wiped the slate clean, and I was the only one left with the mess. As they continued to talk, I tuned them out, my mind racing with thoughts of what this new life would look like. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them dictate my future without a fight. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the floor, and stood up. Their voices trailed off as I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them to their plans and promises. I needed air, space to think, and maybe, just maybe, a way to reclaim some control over my life. As I stepped outside, the cool breeze hit my face, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm the chaos inside me. This was just the beginning, and I had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. Moving into Greg's house felt like stepping into a different world, one where I was an unwelcome guest. The walls were lined with family photos that didn't include me, and the air smelled like a mix of expensive candles and something I couldn't quite place, probably the scent of a life I wasn't part of. Madison and Morgan, my new stepsisters, were already lounging on the couch, their eyes glued to their phones. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, waiting for someone to acknowledge me. "Hey," I said, offering a tentative smile. Madison looked up, her expression a mix of boredom and disdain. "Oh, you're here," she said, as if I were an unexpected delivery. "Yeah, I guess I am," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Morgan didn't even bother to look up, her fingers tapping furiously on the screen. "Dad said we have to share a bathroom now," she muttered, clearly unimpressed. "Sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure why I was apologizing. "I'll try not to get in your way." Madison rolled her eyes. "Whatever. Just don't touch our stuff." I nodded, feeling smaller by the second. The house was beautiful, but it wasn't home. Not yet, and maybe never. Later, at dinner, the tension was palpable. Greg sat at the head of the table, all smiles and charm, while my mom laughed at his jokes like she was auditioning for a sitcom. I picked at my food, trying to tune out the conversation that seemed to flow around me rather than include me. "So, Harper," Greg said, turning his attention to me. "How's school going?" I shrugged, not sure how to respond. "It's fine, I guess." Harper's always been a good student. My mom chimed in, her voice a little too bright. She's got big plans for the future. Urban planner, right? Greg asked, nodding as if he'd just remembered something important. Yeah, I said, surprised he knew. I like the idea of designing spaces that make people feel at home. Interesting, Greg said, though his eyes had already moved on to something else. As the conversation drifted away from me again, I felt a pang of loneliness. My mom was here, but she seemed more invested in impressing Greg than in connecting with me. It was like I was a supporting character in her new life. After dinner, I retreated to my room, a space that still felt foreign with its neutral walls and unfamiliar furniture. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. I wanted to fit in, to be part of this new family, but it felt like trying to force a puzzle piece where it didn't belong. Just when I thought I couldn't feel more out of place, I heard voices outside my door. It was my mom and Greg, their words muffled but clear enough to catch snippets. She'll adjust, Greg was saying. It's just a matter of time. I hope so, my mom replied. I just want her to be happy. Their words should have been comforting, but instead, they felt hollow. I was an afterthought, something to be managed rather than understood. As I lay there, I realized I couldn't just sit back and let this new life happen to me. I needed to find my place, even if it meant carving it out myself. But how? That was the question that kept me awake long after the house had gone quiet, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing determination to make things right. I was rummaging through my closet, looking for a sweater, when I noticed something odd. The shelves were emptier than I remembered. My favorite books, the ones I'd brought from my old room, were missing. I frowned, pulling boxes off the shelves, but they were nowhere to be found. I headed downstairs, where my mom was chatting with Greg in the living room. They seemed so at ease, as if they'd been living this life forever. I hesitated at the doorway, not wanting to interrupt their cozy scene, but I needed answers. Mom, have you seen my books? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned to me, her smile fading slightly. Oh, those? I thought you wouldn't need them anymore, so I gave them to charity. I felt my heart drop. You gave them away? Without asking me, she waved a hand dismissively. They were just collecting dust, Harper. You have new things now. New things. Like I was supposed to replace my life with something shiny and different. I stood there, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. It wasn't just about the books. It was about everything they represented. My past, my memories, gone without a second thought. Greg cleared his throat, sensing the tension. Harper, we can get you new books, anything you want. I shook my head, unable to find the words. It wasn't about replacing them. It was about the fact that they didn't even think to ask. I turned and walked out, my chest tight with anger and something else, something deeper. Outside, I sat on the porch steps, trying to calm down. The sky was overcast, matching my mood. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through messages aimlessly, when a notification caught my eye. It was a group chat, one I hadn't muted yet. The latest message was from my dad, inviting everyone to a family barbecue at his place. Everyone except me. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. They were moving on, building new lives, and I was the one left behind. It was like I was invisible, a ghost in my own family. I stood up, a new determination settling over me. If they thought they could just erase me, they had another thing coming. I headed inside, my mind buzzing with ideas. I needed to find a way to remind them I was still here, still part of this family, whether they liked it or not. As I walked past the living room, I overheard my mom and Greg talking, their voices low. She'll adjust, Greg was saying. It just takes time. She's stronger than she looks, my mom replied, a hint of something I couldn't quite place in her voice. I paused, my hand on the banister, listening. They didn't know I was there, didn't know I heard the doubt in their voices. It was a small comfort, knowing they weren't as sure of themselves as they seemed. With a deep breath, I headed upstairs, my mind made up. I wasn't going to sit back and let them dictate my life. I was going to reclaim what was mine, starting with my place in this family. And if that meant shaking things up, then so be it. I was ready for whatever came next. After another tense week at Greg's, I found myself at my Aunt Nora's house, seeking the comfort that only her warmth could provide. Her home was like a sanctuary, filled with the smell of freshly baked cookies and the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. It was the kind of place where you could breathe deeply and feel your troubles melt away, even if just for a little while. Nora was in the kitchen, her back to me as she kneaded dough. "Harper, sweetheart," she said without turning around, as if she had a sixth sense for when I needed her. "How's everything going?" I leaned against the counter, watching her work. "It's complicated," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes kind but probing. "Complicated how?" I hesitated, unsure of how to put everything into words. "I feel like I'm living in someone else's life. Mom and Greg are so wrapped up in their world, and Dad's just not there." Nora nodded, understanding more than I could say. "You know, sometimes people get so caught up in their own lives, they forget to look around and see who they're leaving behind." Her words hit home, and I felt a lump form in my throat. "I just wish they'd notice me," I said, my voice cracking. As if on cue, the doorbell rang, cutting through the moment. Nora wiped her hands on a towel and went to answer it. I followed her, curious about who would be visiting. To my surprise, it was Ryder, my stepbrother. He stood awkwardly on the porch, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Ryder," I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, a hint of a grin on his face. "Valerie thought you might want some company. She's worried about you." I blinked, taken aback. Valerie worried about me? It was hard to believe, but the sincerity in Ryder's eyes made me pause. Nora welcomed him in, and we settled in the living room. Ryder and I sat across from each other, the silence stretching between us. "You okay?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes searching. I shrugged, not sure how to answer. "I'm managing." He nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. "You know, my mom's not bad. She just freaks out sometimes, with the baby coming and all." I nodded, remembering how overwhelmed Valerie had seemed the few times I'd seen her. "It's just hard, you know? Everything's changing so fast." Ryder leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "Yeah, change sucks. But maybe it's not all bad. I mean, you've got your aunt and uncle, right? They seem cool." I smiled, grateful for his attempt to lighten the mood. "They are. It's just, I miss when things were simple." As we talked, I realized something. Despite the chaos, there were still people who cared, even if they didn't always show it in the ways I expected. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer. Maybe it was about finding my own path, even if it meant leaving some things behind. Just as I was beginning to feel a sense of calm, Nora's phone rang. She answered it, her expression shifting from relaxed to concerned in an instant. She covered the receiver and looked at me, her eyes serious. "It's your mom," she said. "She wants to talk to you. It sounds important." I felt my heart race, uncertainty bubbling up again. As I took the phone, I knew that whatever my mom had to say could change everything. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming next. I took the phone from Nora, my hand trembling slightly. My mom's voice crackled through the line, sounding more urgent than I'd ever heard it. "Harper, we need to talk," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach twist. "About everything. I know things have been hard, and I want to make it right." I glanced at Nora, who was watching me with a mixture of concern and encouragement. "Why now?" I asked, unable to hide the skepticism in my voice. "Because I've realized how much I've been missing," she said, her voice softer now. "I want us to be a family again." I wanted to believe her, but a part of me was wary. Was this genuine, or just another attempt to smooth things over without real change? "Can we meet?" she continued. "Just us. I want to hear how you're really feeling." I hesitated, my mind racing with doubts. But there was also a flicker of hope, a chance that maybe things could be different. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's talk." We agreed to meet at a nearby park, a neutral ground where I could escape if things got too intense. As I hung up, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The next day, I arrived at the park early, the air crisp and the playground empty. I sat on a bench, watching the swings move gently in the breeze. My mom arrived shortly after, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. "Harper," she said, sitting down beside me. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. "I've made mistakes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I got so caught up in starting over that I lost sight of what really matters." I looked at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "And what's that?" I asked. "You," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "You matter. More than anything." Her words were like a balm, soothing the raw edges of my heart. But I couldn't forget the hurt, the feeling of being cast aside. "I just don't understand why it took you so long to see that," I said, my voice cracking. She reached for my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "I was scared, Harper. Scared of failing, of being alone. But I see now that I was pushing away the one person who's always been there." As we talked, I felt some of the tension ease, like a knot slowly unraveling. But there was still so much unsaid, so much unresolved. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, frowning at the screen. It was a message from Ryder. "Dad's in trouble. Need your help." My heart skipped a beat. Jackson, my dad, in trouble? I stood up, my mind racing. "I have to go," I said, my voice urgent. My mom looked confused but didn't press. "Go," she said, her eyes filled with understanding. "We'll talk later." As I hurried away, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was coming to a head. My family, my choices, my future. It was all tangled together, and I was the only one who could make sense of it. But first, I had to find out what was happening with my dad. And I had a feeling it was going to change everything. Ryder's message had my heart racing as I hurried to my dad's house, questions swirling in my mind. What kind of trouble was he in? And why did Ryder think I could help? When I arrived, the house looked the same as ever, but there was an uneasy silence hanging over it. I pushed open the door and found Ryder pacing the living room, his face a mask of worry. "Harper," he said, relief washing over him when he saw me. "Thanks for coming." "What's going on?" I asked, glancing around for any sign of my dad or Valerie. "It's Dad," Ryder said, his voice low. "He's in the study." "Something's wrong." I followed Ryder down the hallway, my heart pounding. We stopped outside the study, and I could hear my dad's voice, strained and anxious, through the door. "Valerie, we're in over our heads," he was saying. "I thought I could manage, but it's all falling apart." I pushed the door open, and my dad looked up, surprise etched on his face. He was sitting at his desk, papers scattered everywhere, his usually neat appearance disheveled. "Harper," he said, trying to muster a smile. "I didn't expect you." I crossed my arms, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ryder said you needed help." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've made some bad investments, and now we're on the brink of losing everything." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. My dad, the financial analyst who always seemed so in control, was unraveling before my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice softer now. "I didn't want to worry you," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I could fix it." I glanced at Ryder, who was watching us with a mix of concern and hope. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling helpless but determined to help in any way I could. My dad shook his head, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "I don't know, Harper. I don't know." As I stood there, the enormity of the situation hit me. My family was falling apart, and I didn't have the power to stop it. The anger and betrayal I'd felt before seemed insignificant compared to the fear of losing everything. Just then, Valerie appeared in the doorway, her expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "We need to sell the house," she said, her voice trembling. "It's the only way." My dad nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I know." The room felt like it was closing in on me. The home I'd known, the life I'd taken for granted, was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. As I turned to leave, Ryder caught my arm. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're family, right?" I nodded, grateful for his support but feeling more lost than ever. As I walked out of the house, the weight of the world on my shoulders, I realized that my ideas of revenge and justice were meaningless in the face of such overwhelming loss. I needed to find a new path, one that didn't rely on old grudges or past hurts. But first, I had to face the reality that everything I'd known was changing, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to handle it. As I stepped into the cold evening air, I knew that whatever came next would test me in ways I hadn't imagined. And somehow, I had to find the strength to face it. The air felt electric as I walked into the lawyer's office, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment I'd been building towards without even realizing it. Lila and Jackson were already there, sitting on opposite sides of the room, their expressions unreadable. The tension was thick, almost palpable. "Harper," my mom said, her voice a mix of surprise and something else, maybe guilt. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "I'm here to talk about Grandma Evelyn's estate." Jackson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. "We thought it best to discuss this together," he said, his voice strained. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I know you both want a piece of what Grandma left," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "But this isn't just about money. It's about her legacy." Lila frowned, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We're just trying to make sure everything is handled properly," she said, her tone defensive. I shook my head, feeling a surge of determination. "No, you're both here because you think you're entitled to something that isn't yours." Jackson finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and something else, maybe fear. "Harper, we're your parents. We just want what's best for you." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "Since when? You've both been so wrapped up in your own lives that you forgot about me." The room fell silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, but I refused to back down. This was my chance to stand up for myself, to claim my place in this chaotic family. "I'm going to use Grandma's estate to honor her," I said, my voice firm. "I'll make sure her legacy lives on, in a way that reflects her values and everything she taught me." Lila's expression softened, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. "Harper, we never meant to hurt you." I met her gaze, seeing the vulnerability there. "I know, but you did. And now it's time for me to make things right." Jackson sighed, his shoulders slumping. "We've been selfish, Harper." "I see that now." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief mixed with sadness. It's not too late to change, but I need to do this on my own terms. As the tension in the room began to ease, the lawyer cleared his throat, drawing our attention. "It seems we have an understanding," he said, his voice calm and professional. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. This was the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild and redefine my place in the world. As I left the office, my parents trailing behind me, I felt a sense of empowerment I'd never experienced before. This was my life, my future, and I was ready to embrace it. Outside, the sun was shining, a gentle breeze ruffling my hair. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on my skin, and knew that whatever came next, I was ready. I had faced my fears, confronted the past, and now, it was time to move forward, carrying Evelyn's legacy with me and creating my own path in the process. The afternoon sun bathed the garden in a warm glow as I sat on the porch steps, watching the world around me settle into a peaceful rhythm. It had been a few weeks since the confrontation at the lawyer's office, and life was slowly finding its balance. I felt different, more grounded, more sure of who I was and where I was going. Nora joined me, handing me a cup of tea. "You've come a long way, Harper," she said, her voice filled with pride. I smiled, taking a sip. "I couldn't have done it without you and Sam." She nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "You've always had the strength, Harper. You just needed to see it for yourself." As we sat there, the scent of blooming flowers surrounding us, I thought about everything that had happened. The anger and betrayal I'd felt towards my parents had transformed into something else, a determination to forge my own path, one that honored Evelyn's legacy and my own dreams. Ryder appeared then, his usual grin in place. "Hey, Harper," he said, plopping down beside me. "How's the urban planning coming along?" I laughed, nudging him playfully. "It's a work in progress, but I'm getting there." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "You're gonna do great things, you know that?" I felt a warmth spread through me at his words. "Thanks, Ryder. That means a lot." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that spoke volumes without needing words. It was moments like these that reminded me of the power of chosen family, the bonds we create that are sometimes stronger than blood. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange, my mom arrived. She looked different, more relaxed, more at peace. "Harper," she said, joining me on the steps. "I wanted to talk." I nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and calm. "What's up?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about family and legacy. I've decided to make some changes to focus on what really matters." Her words resonated with me, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. "I'm glad, Mom." "I really am." We talked for a while about the past, about Evelyn, and about the future. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was real, and that was enough. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I felt a sense of contentment settle over me. I had faced my fears, confronted the past, and emerged stronger for it. And while there were still challenges ahead, I knew I was ready to meet them head-on. In that moment, I realized that life wasn't about seeking revenge or dwelling on the injustices we face. It was about finding our own path, creating our own happiness, and cherishing the people who stand by us along the way. And as I sat there, surrounded by those I loved, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time.